The hospital hallway erupted with shouting. Nurses froze. Patients stared. Security reached for their radios because a mafia boss had just stormed through the automatic doors, coat still wet from the rain, eyes burning with something far more dangerous than anger. He wasn't there for money. He wasn't there for revenge. He was there for a little girl. She stood at the end of the corridor, barefoot, clutching a stuffed animal. Her face was pale, silent, terrified. Behind her, her stepfather, sweating, smiling, acting like nothing was wrong. "She fell," he said quickly. "Kids fall all the time." The mafia boss didn't answer. He knelt in front of the girl and gently lifted her chin. That's when he saw it. Finger-shaped bruises around her neck. The room went quiet. Every doctor, every nurse, every guard, because the man who had ended lives without blinking was shaking with restraint. He stood up slowly and looked at the stepfather. And in that moment, everyone in that hospital realized this wasn't a criminal walking in. It was a storm. Stay with me until the end, because what the mafia boss did next didn't just shock the hospital. It changed that little girl's life forever. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video, hit subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. Now let's get started. Vincent Torino hadn't planned on being at Sacred Heart Hospital that Tuesday night. He'd been conducting business at his restaurant, reviewing the books, making sure his legitimate enterprises were running smoothly. The rain hammered against the windows while he signed papers and counted receipts. Just another quiet evening in a life he'd carefully constructed to look respectable from the outside. Then his phone rang. The voice on the other end belonged to Maria Santos, a nurse who'd worked the emergency room for 15 years. She'd seen Vincent around the neighborhood, knew his reputation, but more importantly, she knew his daughter Sofia had been friends with 8-year-old Emma Rodriguez before Sofia moved away with her mother after the divorce. Maria's voice cracked as she spoke. "Mr. Torino, I know we've never really talked, but I need help. There's a little girl here, Emma Rodriguez. She's hurt bad, and her stepfather brought her in claiming she fell down the stairs. But the injuries don't match, and he won't let anyone examine her properly. He keeps saying he's taking her home." Vincent's pen stopped moving across the paper. "What kind of injuries are we talking about?" "Bruises around her neck, defensive wounds on her arms, a dislocated shoulder that looks like someone yanked it. Mr. Torino, I've seen accidents and I've seen abuse. This is abuse." The restaurant went silent around him. His men noticed the change in his posture, the way his jaw tightened. They'd learned to read these signs over the years. When Vincent Torino got that look, someone was about to face consequences. "Why are you calling me?" Vincent asked quietly. "Because her stepfather is connected. He's got friends in the police department, friends in social services. Every time someone tries to help Emma, his people make problems disappear. But you," Maria's voice dropped to a whisper, "you have a different kind of influence." Vincent closed the ledger book with a snap. "What's the stepfather's name?" "David Kellerman. He owns 3 auto dealerships across the city. Married Emma's mother 2 years ago after her father died in a construction accident. The mother died 6 months later. Suspicious circumstances, but nothing was ever proven." The pieces clicked together in Vincent's mind. He remembered Emma now, a bright little girl with pigtails who used to play with Sofia in the park. She'd been happy then, full of laughter. The image of that same child lying broken in a hospital bed made something cold and furious settle in his chest. "Keep her there," Vincent said, standing up from his desk. "I don't care what you have to do. Keep her there until I arrive. Mr. Torino, I could lose my job. If Kellerman complains, he won't be complaining about anything after tonight." Vincent hung up and turned to his men. 3 of them sat at the bar, nursing drinks and discussing tomorrow's shipment. They looked up as he approached, recognizing the shift in atmosphere. "Boss?" Tony Marcelli asked, setting down his whiskey glass. "We're going to the hospital. Someone's been hurting a child." That was all Vincent needed to say. In his organization, there were lines you didn't cross. Hurting kids was at the top of that list. Tony, Frank, and Sal stood without question, checking their weapons and grabbing their coats. The drive to Sacred Heart took 12 minutes through the rain-slicked streets. Vincent sat in the passenger seat, his mind racing through possibilities. He could handle Kellerman quietly, make him disappear without a trace. But that might traumatize Emma further. He could use his connections to destroy the man financially, legally, but that would take time. And the girl needed protection now. By the time they pulled into the hospital parking lot, Vincent had decided on a different approach. Sometimes the most effective solution was the simplest one. Sometimes you just had to remind people that there were still consequences in this world. The automatic doors slid open as they approached. Vincent's expensive Italian shoes clicked against the polished floor. His long coat dripped rainwater onto the linoleum. Behind him, his 3 associates spread out naturally, covering exits and sight lines without appearing threatening to the medical staff. That's when Vincent saw her. Emma Rodriguez stood at the end of the corridor, exactly as Maria had described. 8 years old, barefoot, wearing a hospital gown that hung loose on her small frame. She clutched a worn, stuffed rabbit against her chest, the same one Sophia used to play Tea Party with. Her dark hair fell across her face, but Vincent could see the fear in her eyes. Behind her stood David Kellerman, mid-40s, perfectly styled hair, expensive suit that couldn't quite hide his nervous energy. He was talking to a doctor, gesturing animatedly, playing the concerned stepfather role to perfection. "She's clumsy," Kellerman was saying, his voice carrying down the hallway. "Always has been. Kids that age, they don't watch where they're going. She was running up the stairs, slipped, tumbled down. Could have been much worse, really." The doctor looked uncomfortable. "Mr. Kellerman, some of these injuries suggest... What they suggest is that I need to be more careful supervising her. Maybe install some safety gates, rubber mats on the stairs. I appreciate your concern, doctor, but I know my daughter. We've been through this before with her clumsiness." Vincent noticed how Kellerman emphasized the word daughter, claiming ownership, asserting authority, using the system's assumptions about family structures to shield himself from scrutiny. That's when Emma looked up and saw Vincent approaching. Her eyes widened, not with fear, but with something that looked almost like hope. She remembered him, remembered the man who used to bring Sophia to the playground, who always had kind words and sometimes brought both girls ice cream on hot summer days. Vincent walked directly to where she stood, ignoring Kellerman's protestations and the doctor's confusion. He knelt down in front of Emma, bringing himself to her eye level. Up close, he could see everything Maria had described. The finger-shaped bruises around her throat were purple and fresh. Her left shoulder sat wrong, clearly dislocated. There were older bruises on her arms in various stages of healing, but it was her eyes that broke something inside Vincent's chest. The spark he remembered from the playground was gone, replaced by the hollow look of someone who'd learned not to expect rescue. "Hello, Emma," he said gently. "Do you remember me? I'm Sophia's papa." Emma nodded slightly, her grip tightening on the stuffed rabbit. "Are you hurt, sweetheart?" Before Emma could answer, Kellerman stepped forward, his voice sharp with authority. "Excuse me, who are you? You can't just walk in here and start questioning my daughter." Vincent stood slowly, his movements deliberate and controlled. When he turned to face Kellerman, every person in that corridor felt the temperature drop 10 degrees. "Your daughter?" Vincent's voice was quiet, almost conversational. "That's interesting, because I remember when her real father died, and I remember her mother's funeral 6 months ago. So tell me, Mr. Kellerman, exactly how long have you been this child's father?" Kellerman's face flushed red, but he maintained his composure. "I've been caring for Emma since I married her mother. That makes me her legal guardian, and I don't appreciate some stranger walking into a hospital and harassing my family." Vincent stepped closer. The movement was subtle, but everyone in the corridor felt it. The way a deer feels when a wolf enters the clearing. "Stranger," Vincent's voice carried the weight of controlled violence. "I knew this child when she still laughed, when she still smiled, when she didn't flinch every time an adult raised their voice. The doctor shifted uncomfortably, sensing the tension escalating beyond his control. Security guards had materialized at both ends of the hallway, but they hung back, uncertain. This wasn't a typical hospital disturbance. "Look," Kellerman said, forcing a reasonable tone. "I understand your concern. Really, I do. But Emma is going through a difficult phase. She's been acting out since her mother died. Getting into accidents, making up stories. Kids process grief differently." Vincent's eyes never left Kellerman's face. "Stories? Is that what you call those bruises around her neck? A story? She was playing on the jungle gym at school. Got her head caught in the bars. The school called me immediately. These things happen with children who don't follow safety rules." Behind Vincent, Tony Marcelli cracked his knuckles. The sound echoed down the corridor like gunshots. Frank and Sal flanked the exits, their presence suddenly more noticeable to everyone watching. But Vincent raised his hand slightly, a gesture his men understood immediately. "Not yet, Doctor," Vincent said, turning to the physician who'd been examining Emma. "In your professional opinion, are these injuries consistent with playground accidents?" The doctor glanced nervously between Vincent and Kellerman. He'd been practicing medicine for 20 years, had seen every type of injury imaginable. "Well, the pattern of bruising is unusual for that type of accident. Typically, playground injuries present differently." "What my colleague is trying to say," Kellerman interrupted, "is that he's being overly cautious, which I appreciate. But Emma needs rest, not more examinations. I'm taking her home." He reached for Emma's hand, but she pulled away, pressing herself against the wall. The movement was instinctive, practiced, the reaction of someone who'd learned to avoid grabbing hands. Vincent saw it. The doctor saw it. Every nurse in the hallway saw it. "Emma," Vincent said gently, crouching down again. "Would you like to go home with Mr. Kellerman tonight?" Emma's eyes darted between Vincent and Kellerman, fear and confusion warring across her face. She opened her mouth as if to speak, then closed it again. Her grip on the stuffed rabbit tightened until her knuckles went white. "She doesn't need to answer that," Kellerman snapped. "She's 8 years old. Children don't make decisions about their own care." "Actually," a new voice interrupted, "in cases involving suspected abuse, children's preferences carry significant weight." Everyone turned. A woman in a crisp business suit approached from the elevator bank, her heels clicking authoritatively against the floor. She was tall, confident, with the bearing of someone accustomed to courtrooms and confrontation. "Who are you?" Kellerman demanded. "Catherine Walsh, Child Protective Services. I received an anonymous call about a child in distress at this location." She looked directly at Vincent. "I assume you're the concerned citizen who contacted our emergency line?" Vincent hadn't made any such call, but he nodded slightly. Someone else was playing chess on this board, and he was curious to see how the game developed. Catherine knelt beside Emma, her voice warm but professional. "Hi, sweetheart. I'm Catherine. I work with children who might need help. Can you tell me what happened to your neck?" Emma looked at Kellerman, whose jaw had tightened to the point where his temples bulged. Then she looked at Vincent, who gave her the slightest encouraging nod. "He grabbed me," Emma whispered, so quietly that everyone had to lean forward to hear. "I was trying to call my grandma, and he grabbed my neck and said I wasn't allowed to use the phone anymore." The corridor went silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant beeping of medical equipment. Kellerman's mask finally slipped. "She's lying. She's been doing this ever since her mother died, making up stories for attention. Her therapist says it's a grief response." "What therapist?" Catherine asked, pulling out a notepad. "Dr. Richard Hoffman. He's been treating Emma for behavioral issues. He can verify everything I'm saying." Vincent's associate Sal stepped forward and whispered something in his ear. Vincent's expression darkened. "Dr. Hoffman?" Vincent said slowly. "Is that the same Dr. Hoffman who lost his medical license 3 years ago for inappropriate contact with underage patients?" Kellerman's face went pale. That's not... You're confusing him with someone else." But Catherine was already on her phone, speaking in rapid, clipped tones to someone at her office. When she hung up, her expression had shifted from professional concern to barely contained anger. Mr. Kellerman, Dr. Richard Hoffman's license was permanently revoked in 2021. He's not legally permitted to practice therapy with minors. If you've been taking Emma to see him... This is ridiculous, Kellerman sputtered. You're all making a huge mistake. I'm calling my lawyer. He pulled out his phone, but Vincent's hand closed over his wrist. The grip looked gentle, almost friendly, but Kellerman's face contorted with pain. You know what I think happened here tonight? Vincent said conversationally. I think Emma tried to call for help. Maybe she remembered her grandmother's phone number, or maybe she just dialed randomly, hoping someone would listen. And when you realized what she was doing, you lost control. You grabbed her throat to stop her from talking, because that's what cowards do when they're afraid their secrets might get out. Kellerman tried to pull his wrist free, but Vincent's grip was iron. You're insane. I would never hurt Emma. She's my daughter. No, Vincent said, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than any shout. She's not your daughter. She's not your property. She's not your victim anymore. Emma had been watching this exchange with growing amazement. For the first time in months, someone was standing up to David Kellerman. Someone wasn't backing down from his threats or believing his lies. Catherine finished documenting everything she'd witnessed and heard. Mr. Kellerman, I'm placing Emma Rodriguez in emergency protective custody pending a full investigation. You'll need to come with me to answer some questions. You can't do this, Kellerman protested. I have rights. I have custody papers. Custody papers can be challenged, Catherine replied calmly, especially when there's evidence of abuse and fraud regarding medical care. Vincent finally released Kellerman's wrist, but remained close enough to intervene if necessary. Emma, he said gently, would you like to call your grandmother now? Emma nodded, tears streaming down her face. But for the first time since Vincent had arrived, they weren't tears of fear. They were tears of relief. As Catherine led Emma toward a private room to make her phone call, the little girl stopped and looked back at Vincent. Thank you, she whispered. Vincent knelt one more time and gently touched her shoulder. You're safe now, sweetheart, and you're never going to be alone again. But Kellerman wasn't finished. As police officers arrived to escort him for questioning, he turned back with desperate fury. You think you've won something here? You have no idea who you're dealing with. I have connections. I have money. I'll be out by morning, and I'll make sure everyone involved in this pays. Vincent's men tensed, but Vincent himself remained perfectly calm. He walked over to where Kellerman stood between two officers and spoke quietly enough that only Kellerman could hear. What he said made David Kellerman's face go white as hospital sheets. The words Vincent whispered to Kellerman were simple, but they carried the weight of absolute certainty. I know about the insurance policy on Emma's mother. I know about the brake lines. And I know where you hid the mechanic who did the work. Kellerman's legs nearly gave out. Those secrets had been buried deeper than concrete foundations, protected by layers of corruption and fear. But Vincent Torino had resources that reached into places most people couldn't even imagine. The officers led Kellerman away, his bravado crumbling with each step. But Vincent knew this was only the beginning. Men like Kellerman didn't disappear quietly into the night. They fought back with lawyers and connections and dirty money. They twisted the system until victims became villains and predators walked free. That's when Vincent made a decision that would change everything. 3 days later, Emma Rodriguez sat in the living room of her grandmother Rosa's house, finally safe for the first time in 2 years. Her grandmother fussed over her constantly, making her favorite foods and reading stories until she fell asleep. The social worker, Catherine, visited daily to check on her progress, but Emma kept asking the same question. Where is Mr. Vincent? When will I see Sophia's papa again? Rosa didn't know how to answer. She'd heard whispers in the neighborhood about Vincent Torino, stories that made her cross herself and pray for protection. But she'd also seen how gently he'd treated Emma at the hospital, how his presence had somehow made the nightmare stop. Meanwhile, across the city, Vincent was orchestrating something unprecedented. He sat in his restaurant's back room, surrounded by documents, photographs, and evidence that most law enforcement agencies could only dream of accessing. His network of informants had worked around the clock, following money trails and uncovering connections that painted a picture of systematic corruption. Kellerman hadn't been working alone. There was a whole network of people who enabled predators like him, judges who sealed records, police officers who buried investigations, social workers who looked the other way, doctors who falsified reports, all of them protected by a web of mutual benefit and shared guilt. Tony Marcelli spread the latest findings across the table. "Boss, you're not going to believe what we found. Kellerman's been running this scheme for years. He targets single mothers with life insurance policies, marries them, then arranges accidents. Emma's mother was the fourth victim. Vincent studied the photographs of the previous women. Jennifer Walsh died in a house fire 6 months after marrying Kellerman. Patricia Chen drowned during a family vacation. Sarah Martinez overdosed on prescription medication she'd never been prescribed. All ruled accidents or misadventures, all leaving behind substantial insurance payouts and orphaned children. What happened to the other kids?" Vincent asked quietly. "That's the worst part," Sal replied, his voice heavy. "2 of them died in foster care under suspicious circumstances. The third one, a boy named Marcus, he's been missing for 8 months, officially listed as a runaway." Vincent's hands clenched into fists. The scope of this horror was beyond anything he'd imagined. Emma hadn't just been an isolated victim. She'd been part of a systematic operation that treated children as disposable obstacles to profit. Frank pulled out another folder. "There's more. We traced the money Kellerman's been moving around. He's got partners. The whole thing's organized like a business. They identify targets, court them, eliminate them, then dispose of any witnesses. The insurance payouts get split between multiple parties. Who else is involved? Judge Harold Morrison handles most of the custody cases. Detective Ray Castellano buries the investigations. Dr. Amanda Foster signs off on the death certificates. There's at least 6 others we've identified so far." Vincent stood and walked to the window, looking out at the rain-soaked street. In the old days, problems like this got solved with bullets and unmarked graves. But Emma had changed something in him. She deserved justice, not just revenge. She deserved a world where other children wouldn't suffer what she'd suffered. "Set up meetings with everyone on that list," Vincent said finally. "But we're not going to kill them." His men exchanged glances. This wasn't the Vincent Torino they knew. The man who'd built his reputation on swift, brutal retribution was talking about mercy for child killers. "Boss," Tony said carefully, "what exactly are you planning?" Vincent turned back to face them, and they saw something in his eyes they'd never seen before. Not rage or calculation or cold determination, something warmer, something that looked almost like hope. "We're going to give them a choice. They can confess everything, testify against each other, and spend the rest of their lives in prison. Or they can refuse and deal with the consequences of crossing a line that should never be crossed. And if they refuse?" Vincent's expression hardened slightly. "Then we remind them that some sins are unforgivable, but we do it legally, we do it publicly, and we make sure the whole world knows exactly what kind of monsters they are." Over the next week, Vincent's plan unfolded like clockwork. Each member of Kellerman's network received an unexpected visit, not from Vincent himself, but from his associates, carrying manila envelopes filled with evidence of their crimes. Judge Morrison was approached in his private chambers between cases. Detective Castellano got his envelope in the police station parking lot. Dr. Foster found hers waiting in her office after lunch. Each envelope contained the same message. "You have 48 hours to contact the FBI and confess your involvement in multiple homicides. After that, this evidence becomes public." The first crack came from Dr. Foster. Faced with undeniable proof of her falsified death certificates and a choice between federal prosecution and public exposure, she chose to cooperate. Her confession opened floodgates that couldn't be closed. Within days, the conspiracy began collapsing. Judge Morrison attempted suicide rather than face exposure. Detective Castellano fled the city, only to be arrested at the airport. One by one, the network that had protected predators like Kellerman crumbled under the weight of their own guilt. But the most important breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Marcus Chen, the missing boy everyone assumed was dead, walked into a police station in Philadelphia. He'd been living on the streets for 8 months, terrified to come forward because he'd witnessed his mother's murder and knew the police couldn't be trusted. Marcus's testimony provided the final pieces of evidence needed to unravel the entire conspiracy. His mother hadn't drowned during a family vacation. She'd been held underwater in their hotel bathtub while Marcus watched from the closet where she'd hidden him. Kellerman and 2 associates had made it look like an accident, then coached Marcus to lie to investigators. When Marcus refused to stay quiet, they'd arranged for him to disappear from foster care. Only a sympathetic social worker's last-minute warning had given him a chance to run. The media explosion that followed was unprecedented. National news outlets picked up the story of the organized child-killing conspiracy. Federal investigators swarmed the city. Politicians demanded answers about how such a network could operate for years without detection. And at the center of it all was the unlikely figure of Vincent Torino, the Mafia boss who'd brought down a conspiracy that legitimate law enforcement had failed to uncover. But Vincent wasn't interested in publicity or praise. While reporters camped outside his restaurant and federal agents requested interviews, he was focused on something more important. Emma Rodriguez was having nightmares. Despite being safe with her grandmother, despite knowing Kellerman was in federal custody facing multiple life sentences, Emma couldn't sleep. She woke up screaming every night, convinced that somehow he would come back for her. Catherine Walsh called Vincent personally. "She keeps asking for you. I know this is unusual, and I understand if you can't get involved, but Emma trusts you in a way she doesn't trust other adults right now." Vincent found himself standing on Rosa Rodriguez's front porch on a quiet Sunday afternoon, holding a small wrapped package. He'd never been nervous about anything in his adult life, but somehow the prospect of facing an 8-year-old girl's trauma felt more daunting than any business negotiation he'd ever handled. Rosa opened the door and studied his face for a long moment. Finally, she stepped aside to let him enter. "She's been waiting for you," she said simply. Emma sat curled up on the living room couch, still clutching the same stuffed rabbit from the hospital. When she saw Vincent, her face lit up for the first time in weeks. "Mr. Vincent, you came back." He sat down beside her, careful to maintain appropriate distance while still conveying warmth. "I promised you'd never be alone again, remember? I keep my promises." Emma leaned against his arm, a gesture of trust that made his chest tighten. "Grandma says the bad man can't hurt me anymore. Is that true?" "It's true. He's going to be in prison for the rest of his life, and all the people who helped him are going to prison too. But what if he has friends? What if they come looking for me?" Vincent considered his words carefully. He could have offered empty reassurances, told her not to worry, promised that nothing bad would ever happen again. Instead, he chose honesty. "Emma, there will always be bad people in the world, but there are also good people, and the good people are stronger when they work together. You have your grandmother who loves you. You have Catherine who makes sure children are safe. You have police officers who catch bad guys. And you have me." He handed her the wrapped package. Inside was a small cell phone, already programmed with important numbers. "This is your emergency phone. If you ever feel scared, if anything ever seems wrong, you press this button and it calls me directly. Day or night, it doesn't matter. I'll answer, and I'll come help you." Emma held the phone like it was made of gold. For the first time since the hospital, she smiled. "Really? You promise?" "I promise. But Emma, I need you to promise me something too." She nodded seriously. I need you to promise me that you'll remember you're braver than you think you are. What happened to you was terrible, but you survived it. You spoke up when it mattered. You saved not just yourself, but other children too. That makes you a hero." Tears rolled down Emma's cheeks, but they were different tears now. Not tears of fear or pain, but tears of release. For 2 years, she'd carried the weight of secrets and terror. Now, finally, she could let it go. Vincent stayed for dinner that night, listening to Emma talk about school and friends and normal 8-year-old concerns. Rosa watched him carefully, this dangerous man who'd somehow become her granddaughter's protector. She saw how gently he corrected Emma's table manners, how patiently he answered her endless questions, how naturally he seemed to understand what she needed. As he prepared to leave, Rosa walked him to the door. "Mr. Torino, I don't pretend to understand your world or your business, but I want you to know that Emma's mother is looking down from heaven, and she's grateful for what you've done." Vincent nodded, unable to trust his voice. In destroying Kellerman's network, he'd discovered something unexpected about himself, somewhere beneath the layers of violence and calculation that had defined his adult life. There was still capacity for something pure, something that had nothing to do with power or profit or reputation. Walking to his car, Vincent made another decision that would have surprised anyone who knew his history. He pulled out his phone and called Catherine Walsh. "Catherine, it's Vincent Torino. I want to discuss setting up a foundation, something that helps children like Emma and makes sure cases like this don't fall through the cracks again." There was silence on the other end of the line. Then Catherine's voice, careful but intrigued. "What kind of foundation are you thinking about? The kind that has resources to investigate when legitimate channels fail? The kind that can protect witnesses and fund therapy and make sure children have advocates who can't be bought or intimidated? The kind that turns predators into the hunted instead of the hunters?" Vincent looked back at the house where Emma was probably getting ready for bed, finally able to sleep without nightmares. "I want to make sure no other child goes through what she went through. And I want to make sure that when they do speak up, someone listens." The Vincent Torino Foundation would become one of the most effective child advocacy organizations in the country. But that night, Vincent wasn't thinking about foundations or public recognition. He was thinking about a little girl who'd taught him that sometimes the most important battles aren't fought for money or territory or respect. Sometimes they're fought for something as simple as a child's right to feel safe. And sometimes, when you win those battles, you discover that the person you've really saved is yourself. Vincent Torino never expected that one phone call would transform him from a man who took lives to someone who saved them. What started as protecting one little girl became dismantling an entire network of predators who had been operating in plain sight for years. Emma Rodriguez got her childhood back. Marcus Chen got justice for his mother. And countless other children got protection from monsters who thought badges and money made them untouchable. The Vincent Torino Foundation continues operating today, investigating cases that fall through the cracks and ensuring children's voices are heard when the system fails them. Because sometimes it takes someone who understands darkness to bring light to the darkest places. What Vincent whispered to Kellerman that night remains between them. But Kellerman never walked free again, and neither did any of his accomplices. Sometimes the most unlikely heroes emerge from the most unexpected places, and sometimes protecting the innocent is the most dangerous thing you can do.